The Planning Committee doesn't currently have a chair, and I call on the elected members to elect a chair for this evening.
I'm going to nominate Councillor Basalt. Do you accept?
I do accept if elected members are happy with it.
Any other nominations? No, there being none, I'll declare Councillor Basalt chair tonight.
Pretty sure about equally uncomfortable. Is it all power to I can see the end, but I can't vote. Oh, which is yeah. Some lower.
Right, the time being 5:01, we'll try and get going. Welcome to Hobart City Council Planning Committee on the 22nd of November 2023. In the room we have Alderman Zuko, Councillor Kelly, Councillor Lohberger, Councillor Coates, yes, Councillor Elliott, Councillor Dutta, Councillor Harvey and the Deputy Lord Mayor and myself. At the outset, I'd like to do an acknowledgement to country, recognising the Palawa and Muanina people who have been the custodians on the land in which we meet, and recognise that they have never ceded their land and that they continue to be the ongoing custodians of the land in which we approve planning decisions this evening. So, are there any apologies or leaves of absence from the floor? Lord Mayor, Councillor Sherlock and Councillor Bloomfield are apologies for this evening's. Moving on to item 1, confirmation of minutes. Can I have someone to move? Thank you, Councillor Dutta. All those in favour? Move unanimously. Consideration of supplementary items. Are there any? Moving on. Indications of pecuniary and conflicts of interests. Are there any? There being none. Item 4, the transfer of agenda items. Does anyone wish to transfer any agenda? No. And moving on to the council acting as a planning authority, consideration of items with deputations.
So moved.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Deputy Lord Mayor. All those in favour?
Aye.
So moving on to item 6.1.2, 199 Macquarie Street, Hobart. We have 2 deputations this evening, and I invite Representative Martin Stevenson to come forward to make his deputation. Just take a seat at the table there, Martin. Pull the microphone as close as you can, and you'll have 5 minutes from when you start to make your statement, after which there'll be some questions, an opportunity for questions from elected members. I'll give you a warning when you've got 30 seconds to go.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Deputy Lord Mayor, Councillors, Aldermen, for meeting us this week and listening to our concerns about this proposal. I'm representing the owners of 201 Macquarie Street, and I'm the design architect and lead consultant for the team working towards commencing construction on the neighbouring apartment building that was approved in 2022 at TASCAT for 201. John Paul Cummings, also one of the owners, is here if you have questions and if that's appropriate.
Mr. Stevenson, if you wouldn't mind just speaking up a little so that all those can hear in the room.
I can't move this any closer, sorry. But
that's okay. Just raise the voice a little. Thank you.
Beyond what we've already submitted and discussed with you, we wish to briefly highlight 2 main points whilst providing some graphics of the proposal in the context of the 201 approved apartments. Firstly, as described to you on site with those I've met, we see this proposal as a bit of a cake and eat it type scenario. The first slide you see on the screen there is its model image of their proposal taken from the advertised documents. We feel this proposal clearly treats 201 as a vacant site. The application makes passing references to the approved apartments at 201, but makes no effort to respect the amenity, residential amenity that is, in the proposal, something that the zone purpose states, and this is a quote from 15.119, to maintain an appropriate level of amenity for residential uses without unreasonable restriction or constraint on the nature and hours of commercial activities. This second image is transposes the proposal against our approved apartments. So the proposal is in yellow, our approved apartments in white, and the grey is existing buildings. The pink is actually, the existing buildings on our site. I think it's fair to say from any angle, the proposal actively seeks to oppose this zone purpose by essentially blocking off the eastern side of our apartments. Simply put, if approved, this proposal will make a third of the 39 apartments we propose to build unlivable and, frankly, the project unviable. This again is taken from the applicant's documentation. It's a photo montage of what you see from Macquarie Street, excluding any context, obviously. Whilst zero boundary setback is acceptable in the zone, the applicant seeks discretion for double the acceptable solution for height and argues there's sufficient distance from adjacent properties and the predominant two-storey buildings around it that the proposed height and scale that is not relevant. However, in the Iron Inc. report from the applicant's documents on page 33 states the approved development at 201 Macquarie Street is sited in a similar location centrally within the block, presenting a height and bulk similar to the proposed development without substantial setbacks to side or rear boundaries. Whilst construction has not commenced, the height, bulk, scale and transition to adjoining buildings was considered appropriate and a permit was granted. Whilst the development cannot be relied upon, the proposal benefits from the additional separation distance from 49 and 47 Mole Street, reinforcing the period as a background element. Now, in short, when it comes to its adjoining neighbour, us at 201, the approved apartments are basically ignored. However, when it comes to the other adjacent neighbours, the 201 approval design is being put forward as a precedent. We don't think this is appropriate. This last slide is something we've prepared, which is transposing in block form the proposal next to our approved building that's taken from the montages we prepared for the TASCAT appeal. Frankly, I'm pretty embarrassed to publicly present this because I feel it, in reality, shows I don't think any reasonable person would see this and think it's an acceptable outcome or desirable for Hobart, no matter what the planning nuances of the zone allow. Second main point relates to...
30 seconds remaining.
Sorry?
30 seconds remaining.
Relates to the Planning Officer's recommendation for approval, which is based on the assessment of the proposal in the context of the existing and adjoining adjacent buildings, but not the approved apartment as they have not commenced. Now, we're not clear on what their definition of commencement is, but yesterday we submitted 2 legal opinions to Council that basically justify that we have made a substantial commencement based on the work we have done towards satisfying our planning permit and also contracting Tas Networks to install power at a cost of $155,000. I've got these here. I don't know if they need to be tabled or not, but all the councillors have been sent them, as has the General Manager.
Thank you, Mr Stevenson. That's time. I'll open the floor to questions to you if you're able to answer the questions from any elected members. Councillor Lohberger.
Thank you, Chair, and just through you to Mr Stevenson. What's the building we're assessing here, the yellow block there, what's that actually being built over?
Being built over the driveway. As I understand it, they're excavating the driveway down, splitting it into 2 levels. One is an entrance, one becomes an exit. That will need to expose and, in our opinion, unreasonably excavate the sewer connection to our property, but also rebuild the networks infrastructure, which has an easement down that driveway and accesses a substation in the basement area. We understand Tas Networks have told them that they need more information, and if they want to do it, they have to relocate that substation. But there's nothing that we've seen in the application which addresses it.
Any further questions? Deputy Lord Mayor.
Yeah, thank you. Through you, Chair. Thanks for your deputation and for taking us through your concerns on site. I'm just so those, just to be clear, there are balconies on that side facing 201.
Yes.
Yep.
Yep.
Yep. And so they would be particularly covered.
Essentially, there'll be a metre separation between the two. All but the top level of our building will have a wall facing it. The balconies are screened, but probably not necessary if this was built. It's a moot point, as it wouldn't happen.
And what would those balconies be looking onto? Would it be a blank wall, or what would it be?
If that was built, yeah, blank. I think it's brick and concrete wall. The applicant will be better answering that.
Alrighty, thank you.
Councillor Harvey.
I don't think it's a planning consideration, but what's the implications of this development on the Tas Networks connection?
So initially we were long delayed getting approval, getting sufficient power agreed with Tas Networks for the building. Also, given we're trying to put a large number of vehicle chargers in there, the final solution was actually by using the easement to 199 and connecting to that substation to supply a new substation on our building. So that's been contracted and is underway.
Alderman Zico.
Yeah, just a question in regards to just looking at, I've got a very good view of this photo, which is great. I can see what I think is a balcony. How far is the balcony from the wall, roughly?
It'd be a metre, because they're proposing to build right on the boundary. The edge of those balconies are a metre from the boundary.
So, metre, would the balcony be what, 1.5 or something like that?
The balcony projects a metre and goes into the building a metre and a half.
So it's actually, so the building wall's about another 2.5 away from that.
Because 2 metre setback to the wall and 3 metres to the glass, which
Okay,
is the back of the balconies.
so excluding the balcony, the setback of the actual main structural wall would be 2.5 metres roughly.
2 metres for the main body of the building, and
Yeah.
then 3.5 as it gets steps back at the top.
3.5 steps back. Okay, thank you.
If there's nothing further, thank you, Mr. Stevenson. We'll move on to the second deputation from the applicant, Mr. Peter Scott, representing X Squared Architects. If you can come forward to the table, Mr. Scott, same deal. Pull the microphone as close as you can and speak up a little bit for us, because some of us are hard of hearing. You'll have 5 minutes, and I'll give you a 30-second warning when you're ready.
Thank you. We've provided a copy of our deputation, so you can refer to it as we go. I would just run through what I've provided for you. Obviously, the building we're proposing is not yellow, so just in case there's any question about that. The proposal is for an addition to an existing office building. And we explored the options of where it could be located and met with UDAP and council officers on a number of occasions to discuss how we might approach the proposition. In terms of the actual site for an extension, the building occupiers, currently it's a mixed-use office tenancy, have indicated to the owners that their sweet spot is an internal floor area of 1,000 square metres, and that the building doesn't currently provide that. So that's the impetus for this development, to provide additional floor area for existing tenants as they're experiencing incremental increase in spatial demand. We looked at locating the building on the other, the extension on the other side, but that's the site of some significance from an archaeological perspective. The government's printing office was created a bit further down on Barrack Street, and the mill race ran from the Hobart rivulet to that mill race, through a mill race to that mill. And the remains of that may exist on the northern side of the building, so we felt that was not an appropriate place to build an extension. The rear of the property, where the car park is currently, was considered to provide too much potential impact on the rivulet, and seen from Collins Street, across the top of the buildings on Collins Street. So a linear building at 90 degrees to Collins Street reduced the impact across into Collins Street, and that's why we selected this side of the building for the extension. The proposal is for 4 floors of office space and an additional car park level, and they've been basically over the top of the existing car park at the back and above the driveway on the side. So from our perspective, we took that design to UDAP. UDAP's commentary was not particularly positive, and we then modified that design across the following weeks and months. We cut back the building from the rivulet so that it steps back in a way perhaps that allows greater setback and amenity, but also reduces the impact as seen not only from Collins Street, but also from Mole Street across 201, for example, but across the properties coming in from Mole Street, so that the setback is stepped back and it has a much reduced impact on that view line through the site back towards the CBD. And we also worked to modify the appearance of the blank wall, if you like, to the 201 Macquarie Street side of the building, so that it provided a more interesting and engaging face to that property. So I won't dwell perhaps on the items that I've included in the deputation, but I would say in the documents that were provided to you, you will see on the last page an outline of the proposal against the red outline of the approved development on 201. And to Martin's comments, I would just say that when we first brought this proposal to council, we included the outline of the development at 201 in our proposal, and we were recommended by council to eliminate it because it had no bearing on our planning consideration of this building, which may exist in its own right, and without knowing the building next door does not exist. And therefore we were recommended to remove those images from our planning application, and that's what we did. So this building stands in its own right, the application stands in its own right. To the points raised, Martin in particular, the apartments may be approved but they don't exist, and therefore this development should be assessed in its own right. To the comment that we wanted to have our cake and eat it too, how is that different from a proposition where we actually have a smaller footprint, a smaller profile, we have a greater setback, we have a similar approach to the boundary. The development,
30 seconds.
The
30
development
seconds.
At 201 builds basically to the boundary and it has the same effect as the reverse. So I don't see really that's an argument that can be supported. In terms of the precedent that we seek to set, it is true that council supported the development at 201, and we're proposing a building footprint and profile which is less prominent than that approval, and therefore if there is a precedent it seems reasonable to accept it. And to the commentary about Tas Networks, the owners have engaged with Tas Networks. There is a proposal to upgrade the substation anyway. So there's the reference to Tas Networks is probably not a planning issue. That's a technical issue that the owners are addressing with Tas Networks.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. That's time. I'll open the floor to questions. Are there any questions from elected members? Deputy Lord Mayor.
Yeah, thank you, through you. Thank you for those points of clarification. Can you, this is a hypothetical, but say if 201 had been built, just say, you know, because sometimes things are compared to buildings and sometimes they're not. So if that had been built, would you have this same proposal?
Well, that is truly a hypothetical question, and we were briefed. We started working with the owners of this building about 6 years ago. So this proposal has been a long time coming, and the approval for the development at Tour 1 is relatively recent compared with that time that we've been exploring options here. So I would return to what I said about our site assessment. There are basically 3 places in which we could extend the footprint of the building to provide approximately 1,000 square metres of net lettable area. One is to the north, and we considered that would potentially have negative influence on the amenity of the property on the other side, so 197 Macquarie Street. Because of the nature of solar movements, it would provide shading to 197. But it would also potentially impact on significant archaeology. So we did not pursue an option there.
Thank you. Yep.
Further questions? Alderman Zuko.
On that montage there, what is the distance of the end point of the extension to the rivulet?
At the lowest level, about 7.5 metres, and then steps back to about 13 metres, and then to about 20 metres as the building sets back as it rises up.
Yeah, I'm talking. So you're talking about 13 metres or something like that.
7.5 metres on the lowest level, 13.5 metres on the mid-level, 20 metres on the top level.
Yeah. Now, what was the reasons why you didn't want to do the extension to, say, the rear of the building, where the existing car park is? Because it looks like you're still having the existing car park remaining. Is that correct?
Yeah, so to answer that back to front, the existing car park footprint remains, but it has an additional level of car parking added to increase off-street parking amenity. And in terms of not putting it there to pursue the point that Helen was raising, we didn't want the building to basically be orientated across the site because of the prominence that it would have from Collins Street, viewed across the heritage buildings in Collins Street. So by turning the bulk of the building through 90 degrees, that it presents basically a point towards Collins Street, its impact on the view line across Collins Street is much reduced. And that view line and setback from Collins Street, the setback to this building is in excess of 30 metres. So it becomes a much less prominent feature than it would otherwise have been. So that was the reason we didn't push out to the back of the building.
A couple more questions. No. In the new design, you've got how many levels of car park?
2 levels.
Look, I'm not an architect and won't boast to be one, but looking at that site and looking at the way the design is and looking at the space factor at the back, could a design be implemented where it increases the car parking to the rear and lowers the level in the driveway that's been built and adds to the back? In other words, a design that is lower in height, that has a two-pronged situation with another extension of car park to the rear. In other words, it lowers the driveway length and brings the design round the corner. So it actually is a lesser impact on the overall, and it doesn't interfere with Collins Street.
Look, I guess we could discuss, theoretically, we could discuss a different alternative.
Yeah.
The point was that there are primary office floors within the building, and each one needs the connection to get to 1,000 square metres. So if we produced a lower building, it wouldn't connect through on the upper levels, and it wouldn't provide those with 1,000 metres of NLA. So the reason we need the height is to provide each of those 4 office floors with additional floor area. And so if I understand your proposition correctly, by bringing it forward and lowering it, we're not actually gaining that additional net lettable area on the upper floors.
Thank you.
Further questions? Councillor Harvey.
You mentioned the Urban Design Advisory Panel. Just looking at the last paragraph, the panel were very concerned with this proposal and the proponents' lack of effort in arguing an urban design approach. The panel was unanimous in not endorsing this proposal. So you did mention Urban Design Advisory Panel, and you had responded to some of their concerns, and I think that was, you mentioned that was distance from the rivulet.
Well, there were a number of concerns. I can talk through those if you like.
Yeah, I'd like to hear about that, because the panel was unanimous in not endorsing this proposal. but the lack of urban design approach. What do you think they meant by that? Or, you know?
Yes, I can absolutely talk to that. So I have to you have to understand that UDAP also unanimously opposed the development of 201 Macquarie Street. So the issue is not just with this development, it's with the nature of development such as this. And they opposed the idea that the vacant lot, basically in the middle of the lot between Collins Street and Macquarie Street, should be developed at all. Their concern was about the urban design impact of infilling the inside of blocks. So that was fundamental to their feedback and why, in principle, they opposed this proposition, because they did not like the prospect of those inner elements of those city blocks being developed. They had other commentary about the appearance of the building to the 201 Macquarie side, and they had some commentary about whether there was a better possible relationship with the rivulet. So let me talk to those two things. To the appearance of the building to 201, we modified the design quite extensively from that which was presented to UDAP. It was longer, it was squarer, it was plainer, and we addressed all of those things by reducing the height, increasing the setback and the setback staging from the rivulet, and by introducing a patination to the face to give it articulation. So we addressed their concern about the bulk, if you like, of it. And in terms of the response to the rivulet, they wanted to achieve, like a public park, the rivulet would then become an urban space for the city. But the rivulet's not within the control of the building owners. It's actually in control of Hobart City Council. So creating a tiered approach to encompass that frontage to the rivulet is somewhat contrary when there is no plan for developing the rivulet. So I would say in addition, we met with one of the representatives who lives opposite the property, the other side of the rivulet, and they're in favour of maintaining the rivulet in its current state because it provides them with amenity and shielding of the visual prospect right across the rivulet, not just to 199, but to the back of the motors showroom and to the site at 201. So we did not necessarily agree with UDAP and their approach. We don't agree, just as I imagine the proponents of 201 don't agree, that building in the centre of these blocks is an inappropriate way to develop the city. So we have a fundamental difference, I guess, with UDAP, which is no different from that which we presume would be encountered by anyone seeking to develop these vacant parts of inner pieces of the blocks. Does that assist?
Thank you, Mr. Scott. Are there any further questions for Mr. Scott? There being none, thank you very much. You can return to your seat and we'll move on to debate and questions for staff. We do have two officers available for questions. Development Engineer. Councillor Dale.
Thank you, Chair. To begin with, through you, my first question is with regards to UDAP and their unanimous decision in not approving this. When the plan was modified, did the staff take this back to UDAP?
Through you, Chair, no, we didn't. We're approaching UDAP a little bit differently these days, and that is to bring an application in to UDAP earlier rather than later. And what we found and what we had hoped was that people would respond to the early feedback and they'd be prepared to modify their application, as has happened in this situation. We used to go to UDAP in the advertising period when the application was very locked in and the applicant was reluctant to make any more changes. And so I think the process has worked well here to the extent that the applicant has taken on board the UDAP feedback.
Additional questions?
I'd just like to ask a question, a further question on that one there. So the applicant came back with modified plans after it went to UDAP, but isn't it at times either the applicant and or the council goes back to UDAP with the modified plans?
Through you, Chair, we do. On occasion, that does come with a cost.
Yeah, but it's either the council and or the developers. Haven't developers gone to UDAP before they, with modified plans before they come to council when they're modified?
Through you, Chair, what tends to happen is that a developer might come in for what we call a pre-application
Yep.
session, and then they'll go back to UDAP once
Yep.
the application's actually filed.
Yep.
It's not common for people to go back twice within a formal application
Okay.
being assessed. It costs about $6,000 every time we hold a UDAP meeting.
Yeah, but it is possible though, isn't it?
Through you, Chair, yes, it would be possible.
Thank you.
Councillor Coates.
Thank you. Through you to the appropriate officer. The two bits of pieces of legal advice that we were provided, and the one that was from Leonard Fernandez, hope I pronounced his name correctly. It talks down there at paragraph number 9. Happy to give you on page 3 if you guys want to have a quick read. But to summarise it talks about the engagement of the owners of 201 with council in regards to this application. It says that at no time did HCC or its planners require from 201 any commentary evidence or statement in regards to substantial commencement. I just wanted to sort of get my head around that. The Hobart City Council's process is about determining if there has been commencement. Is it a physical viewing of the site and if there's footings put in place, or because obviously this advice seems to indicate that they have commenced that process, and that would obviously change the determination.
Through you, Chair, we have seen both pieces of legal advice, and we have provided a response to elected members on the hub. I can summarise that response now. The one point which isn't actually addressed in detail in our response is that we're not a deciding body when it comes to the question of whether or not a permit has substantially commenced. That's an interaction of legal principles and factual principles. We can give an applicant an indication as to what we understand. We can say to people, we think you're there, you've crossed the line. But if that was ever challenged, the Supreme Court would ultimately be the deciding forum for whether or not that had actually taken place.
While further questions are being answered, I'll just draw elected members' attention to the screen where Staff Officer Choi is just flying through some of the 3D render. Further questions?
Yeah, I just have a question just on that. So how do we, the council, determine a defined commencement?
Director.
Through you, Chair, there are a number of things that we take into account. A key one for us is whether or not a building permit has been issued, and that's not the case here. So 201 Macquarie Street does not have a building permit to actually construct the development that was approved with the planning permit. Another indication as to whether or not there's been substantial commencement is whether or not there has been work on site, and that's not the case. I accept that there is some work that's been done with Tas Networks, but that work is not part of the planning approved works.
I'll ask the question. Would any developer, whether it's this one or the one next door, and for a need to upgrade power to a site such as these types of developments, need to go to Tas Networks in the first instance to ensure that they got the required amount of power for their site to actually commence the development? Would that be a normal process?
Through you, Chair, that is a parallel process to all the other approvals that they need to obtain. It might assist the elected members if I say that Ms Ayres has done an analysis assuming that the adjacent building was taken into account, and we still reach the same conclusion, and that is that we recommend approval of this proposal.
Councillor Harvey.
We had a change to the planning scheme, which required separation between buildings. That occurred a year or two, a couple of years ago, and that was as a result of developers building to the boundary, which altered the ability for. Well, anyway, there was basically a requirement put into the planning scheme for separation between buildings of whatever the distance was, a metre or so. Where does that start and finish? So that requirement doesn't extend this far up Macquarie Street.
Through you, Chair, it doesn't apply in this particular zone. So this is the urban mixed-use zone, And while it does allow for residential development to take place, it doesn't contain the same residential protections that you'd expect in a residential zone or even in the central zones, which have had those amendments to the scheme which are designed to give greater amenity for those who are living on site. This zone doesn't do a particularly good job of protecting residential amenity.
So ideally, in another situation, would we have that same requirement this far up Macquarie Street and throughout the city?
Yes.
Deputy Lord Mayor.
So again, another question for you, and it's about that a front of a building that close to potentially a built. Say if this had been built at 201, would we still be having the same conversation?
Sorry, through you, Chair, would you mind repeating the question,
So
please?
if 201 had been built, it hasn't started, but say it had, would we still be having the same conversation?
Through you, Chair, the same application could be made, and I anticipate that we would recommend approval for the same reasons that are already set out in our report, and also the additional assessment that Ms Ayres has done when it comes to issues to do with streetscape and transition. I accept that Mr Stevenson referred to a zone purpose statement which talks about residential amenity. Unfortunately, the zone purpose statements don't provide a basis for refusal. They're a broad description of what is hoped is embedded in the standards within that zone, but in this case we can't refer to that as a basis to refuse this application.
And just one more question, just following on from Alderman Zuko's question about substantial commencement. Is that those things like issuing a building permit and substantial, or like if the building is started, is that hard and fast as to the requirements to be considered?
Through you, Chair, no, it's not. It's very, very dependent on the facts. The advice that we usually give developers is to say that you need to have done demolition and excavation and poured the footings. And that's not a hard and fast rule, but the footings would then usually reflect the fact that they are going to actually build what's been approved in the particular planning permit, not that they've done a bit of work on site which could be generic work to support that approved permit or something similar.
But my point is that it's not a hard and fast rule per se. Thank you.
Councillor Dodder.
Thank you, Chair. Through you again to the Acting Director. On 6.9.5, page 29 of 77, C.3c says new windows at the front facade are at street level. So would in theory allow pedestrians to look at the building. Now, this is in theory making an assumption here. My question is, does the glazing satisfy the National Construction Code?
Director.
Through you, Chair, the National Construction Code is a consideration for if this was approved and a planning permit was granted, then the next stage would be to prepare further detailed plans which satisfied or demonstrated compliance with the NCC, and that would be overseen by a building surveyor. So the National Construction Code is not a relevant consideration for you tonight.
Just another follow-up question in that same section. It says there are sufficient windows, and my question is, what constitutes sufficient? What do you take into account from a planning perspective?
Thank you, Chair. I'll just need a moment to reread this part of the report.
6.9.5, page 29.
Through you, Chair. So this provision is all around ensuring that there's passive surveillance of public spaces, and the objective of this provision is to ensure that there are no dark spots around the corner where people can, things could happen that we don't really want to happen, if I can put it that way. And so, again, there are no hard and fast rules about this sort of thing, but the planner who's done the assessment has formed the view that there's sufficient glazing for that protection to exist in the circumstances.
So just a follow-up question then, and 6.9.4, E154.4P1 states that building design must provide for passive surveillance of public spaces by satisfying all of the following. The operative term for me that I'm questioning is that it must provide and it must fulfill, satisfy all the following. So to term it as it's theoretical or, you know, or it's not sufficient, could that satisfy that particular clause?
Director.
Through you, Chair, absolutely. The very nature of an assessment under performance criteria involves some sort of analysis and judgment, essentially, as opposed to an acceptable solution, which is much more of a quantified type analysis. So you're absolutely right in the sense that this brings an element of assessment to it.
Any further questions? Excellent. Would anyone like to kick us off with debate or moving the item for approval or refusal?
No, I have read through it quite thoroughly, you know, and taking into consideration the responses of the staff in the report, and also the two legal opinions that I've read, and I was quite myself taken aback by 2 or 3 points that they made, making reference to the Tasmanian planning scheme and not the scheme that we have, and a few other points. So I would recommend at this stage, and would listen to the debate, that we approve the recommendation by staff.
Thank you, Councillor Doddo. So that's a motion to approve. Does anyone have any further comments? Okay. Councillor Harvey.
We don't stand here, do we? Look, I'm struggling with this one. I just think it's really bad planning to have a building built on the boundary that's going to dramatically affect the potentiality of a building or the amenity of a building, even though it hasn't been substantially commenced. At some point in time it probably will be, but it'll have to be dramatically modified in order to provide residential amenity to those properties on the boundary. So I'm struggling to support this tonight. I just don't think it's a really good outcome for the city. So I'll move that a recommendation for refusal.
Foreshadowed refusal.
So under what grounds? What's the reason?
Hang on, I'll give you the grounds. Yeah, under the, I've just got to find the relevant discretions.
Certainly. While Councillor Harvey looks for that, I might just make a comment or... Oh, no, Alderman Zuko, please, before me.
Yeah, look, I'm struggling with this as well. Every now and then a development comes along where you sit there and you endeavour to evaluate it. And we've got to evaluate it on planning grounds, of course, but you've also got to evaluate things also on the reality of it. And I look at just this montage here itself. You know, I understand, you know, and I feel for the architects that they've got a brief of what they've got to deliver for the proponent. And I've got to say, to me, I would be, if I was the owner of that property and looking at the property next door and the development that was approved there, I'll be saying to myself, well, let's try and redevelop this site somewhere to the back there, because I think that's where the areas will be less impact on the overall streetscape and less impact on also the neighbours. I don't think it's actually a good design for both parties, because on one side, 201, you've got you know, a setback of about 2.5 metres or whatever it is, with balconies protruding onto where a building where supposedly there's people potentially with some windows there. I thought there were working in an office. Really, I think both are wrong. Now the thing is, there is an approval there, and I remember arguing many years ago about what is substantial commencement, and to my point of view, to me, substantial commencement is once a planning approval has been obtained and the developer has gone ahead and spent a considerable amount of money to pre-prepare the site ready for development is a substantial commencement. If it's $100,000, $150,000, $200,000, they've committed to ensuring that when they put that building permit in, they can actually build the thing. So, to my point of view, there has been substantial commencement. Now, I've been around this table long enough and I've argued that time and time again, and this is one of the times I'm going to argue that. The other concern I have, and I think this is where the area is of refusal. 1.3, the proposal relies on performance criteria of 8 areas. So then we've got to go down to to find the performance. And okay, look, you know, I'll grant the car parking because I think that's nor here nor there. But when you start reading the report, and there is argument there, there is serious argument. And then you get to 6.7.8, and I think this is very, very relevant. And I know this because I'm actually associated with a development that and I know the developers are going to the 3rd time to UDAP to ensure that when they come to council with their development, right, you know, they've covered all the dots, even though UDAP's already approved in principle the development, but they've made amendments. So to my point of view, it's very prudent to ensure that you know, any development we get here, I know the council, I think the developers as well should be doing it. But I'll read, the panel believes that the proposed development is incompatible to the streetscape and townscape. Currently there is still consistent slots of views between properties. The proposal extends fully to the side boundary, obliterating any opportunity for glimpse of view beyond from the street. Now I'm sorry, if you, that's a very, very clear direction to me that UDAP not only didn't like it, I think sent a message to maybe totally redesign. And I've got to say, the architectural firm X Squared, I've got total respect for, and I got plenty of respect for the way that it's on. I might feel that maybe the owner's brief might have been a bit over the top, and maybe the owner should reconsider how this development goes ahead. So I cannot support it. I really feel for it, but look, I can keep on going on and finding gaps, but I don't want to keep everyone's time.
Thank you, Alderman Zuko.
So
I'll go to Councillor Lohberger. Before we do that, Councillor Harvey, do you want to clarify your point of refusal?
Yeah, okay. So the proposal, the reason for refusal is the proposal does not meet the acceptable solution or the performance criterion with respect to clause 15.4.1, A1 and P1 of the Hobart Interim Planning Scheme 2015, because the proposed addition fails to allow for a transition in height between the proposed works and the adjoining buildings at 201 Macquarie Street.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. So that'll be a foreshadowed motion because we have a motion for approval before us. Councillor Lohberger.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say, first of all, I've really struggled with this too, and I'm relieved to see a number of my colleagues have. It's a very difficult proposal, this one, to assess. And I'd like to thank Alderman Zuko for the work that he's just done and that he's clearly done already on this. I will be voting against this proposal, joining with Councillor Harvey and Alderman Zuko and anyone else on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lohberger. Councillor Dutta.
Thank you. Some of the comments that was made earlier on by a councillor, there are 2 points that come to mind. Firstly, UDAP stated, one, that a proposal of this density is setback is not warranted. Now, but the question for me is, did they come back or in any way indicate this was a planning matter? One. And number two, it also states, as was referred to by Alderman Zuko, that they're incompatible to the streetscape and townscape. So because we didn't go back to them, would this be satisfied with what you have now, with the modifications?
Through you, Chair, I am reluctant to guess what UDAP's view would have been.
Okay. It just, again, through Chair, through you. The difficulty for me is, as the point has been raised with regards to the proposal of this density and setback, it's a valid point that was made by UDAP. And the second one that was brought to us, the incompatibility to the streetscape and townscape. Now, if this is a planning issue and these two matters have not been satisfied, it creates a bit of a question mark, that's all, for me, when you don't have that alternative from professionals who are advising. And therefore, I'm inclined, as it were, having asked the question, to go along with the staff, in this matter, even though there are question marks that, for me, hasn't been satisfied quite clearly.
Thank you, Councillor. Anything further? Deputy Lord Mayor.
Yeah, thank you. This is a very interesting development. I see that it's on it's really wrapped around the side of the building. It looks like it's over a right of way, over an easement, and I think there are question marks maybe not covered by the planning scheme in relation to that. I fully hear the comments that Alderman Zuko is making around substantial commencement, but I think for me, this is a very difficult situation where we're comparing a building the height of a building next door, which hasn't actually been built. So, and I know we had the same sort of issue when we were considering the fragrance building at the conservatorium, and that, to me, you can't compare something to something that hasn't been built. It just seems it's counterintuitive. This is an urban mixed zone, and it's very unfortunate that we have two developments cheek by jowl. They may, if they were both built, may have some very good elements to them. One is residential. We need residential development, obviously not considering this tonight. And this other is for quality office space, which is important too. But we're not considering that. I think that whilst we have had officers report, and I respect the report that's come to us, I still think we do have these discretions and we should be using them. Sometimes there seems to be some very strange prospects of having a winnable case at tribunal. However, when we see something that really should be challenged, I think that we should actually challenge it rather than accept it. The other thing is that there are neighbours, and I didn't actually see in the report, but neighbours who face Collins Street or live on Collins Street who will be impacted by this development as well. So I think it's not necessarily the best use or best development application that we have had before us. So I've struggled to be able to support this.
Councillor Dodder.
Thank you, Chair. A question that we usually ask ourselves is this, and I want to put it to the Acting Director. If this was to go to the tribunal and appealed, would the staff be able to uphold this?
Through you, Chair, if this was refused, then given that our officers have recommended approval, we would not be able to rely on officers being experts in the tribunal, and we would need to get a consultant planner to support the review.
And the follow-up question, will we get a consultant who would be able to take this on?
Through you, Chair, it's a little bit difficult to comment on that, given that this is a unique situation. I would need to consult with the available planners and get their expert advice.
Thank you.
Councillor Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. I just think there's a few too many ifs and buts here. It's one of these grey ones. I just think at the end of the day we can do better. There's all these little grey areas. I am influenced by what UDAT say. Councillor Zuko's comments too about those issues that he's raised. So it's all been said. I won't repeat it pretty much, but I just think we can do so much better. And of course something's going to go in that block. It's not as if it's going to be sitting there for another 100 years with no one being there. We've really got to consider what's going to be happening there. Now that may not be quite in the planning scheme to hypothesise a bit about that, but I take the point that I think there's enough in the scheme there, in the system, that to substantiate the commencement of work, so therefore it can be justified to say that should be considered. So I cannot unfortunately support this tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly. If everybody's
just one question, and it might I might ask if we can call upon Choi to show us the impact on sunlight, like overshadowing. And I know that's probably not considered, is it, in this zone? So the development proposal for 201 is for apartments, and yet if the building were hard up against that, there would be no consideration. No, thank you.
While Troy prepares that, I might make a few comments myself. I think that it's a shame that we've got two developments that have come forward that are adjacent to each other, one slightly ahead of the other in the process. And as elected members have pointed out, both types of development are needed. However, the residential development is providing a degree of housing mix that we don't really have in Hobart, in that it's primarily one-bedroom housing. Although it's not a planning consideration truly, I'm a little bit disappointed with the scale of the car park building around the rivulet, and in particular as its Collins Street neighbour is a really significant heritage building in the city. I think it's one of very few low-rise buildings of its nature, and certainly every time I walk past it I take note of how beautiful it is. So to have it overbared by a concrete car park is disappointing, to say the least. I think that there's some work potentially for us to do with the state government and as council on this particular zone. I personally feel that if we're going to be building apartments and we want residential living within our CBD, that we need to make sure that we can build with some degree of certainty that apartments, multi-storey apartments, aren't going to have a concrete wall built right up to their balconies. That would be a recipe for disaster, in my view. And that's not a planning consideration for this evening, but it is a strategic planning consideration for us as a council that I think we should take some steps towards addressing. So with that in mind, I won't be supporting this development. There's a few too many unknowns, including whether or not the TAS Network's expenditure counts as significantly commenced, and I'll be supporting the foreshadowed motion as put by Councillor Harvey. If there's nothing further, I think it's time to put this to a vote. So before us we have a motion for approval from Councillor Dutta. All those in favour say... Catherine? Oh yes, so just for clarity for Councillor Coates and for anybody online, because Councillor Coates has not been sworn in formally by the council, he's unable to carry a formal vote this evening. But
not quite accurate. I've been sworn in, but I'm not a member of this committee. Until that motion's passed on Monday, I'm not a member of the committee.
Thank you for clarifying, Councillor Coates. But we do appreciate your attendance this evening and contribution to debate. So I will put that motion for approval from Councillor Dutta. All those in favour say aye. Aye. All those against? Aye. Show of hands. All those in favour? All those against? motion is lost, and that takes us to the foreshadowed motion for refusal from Councillor Harvey. All those in favour of refusal say aye. Aye. All those against? Carried unanimously. Thank you to those in the room. You're welcome to stay for the remainder of planning, but if you wish to get on with your evening, you're welcome to take this opportunity to leave the room.
Chair, I've got a motion I'd like to move now, which might help to fix this situation into the future. Could I just confer between you and the director that it's appropriate to move a motion at this stage that's been circulated?
Yeah, go ahead.
Chair, perhaps if I can indicate, I have sent a suggestion back to you,
Yep.
Councillor Harvey.
Yep, okay. So I'd like to move that a report be prepared on the possible amendments to the planning scheme, the Hobart Interim Planning Scheme 2015, or Tasmanian Planning Scheme, to protect residential amenity in the urban mixed-use zone.
Excellent. Do you require a seconder in this setting for that type of motion? No?
No,
Okay.
it's for a report.
Okay.
Yeah, okay, I've got no problem with a report.
So I'll go again. That a report be prepared on the possible amendments to the planning scheme, Hobart Interim Planning Scheme 2015, or Tasmanian Planning Scheme, to protect residential amenity in the urban mixed-use zone.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. We'll accept that motion. Is there any debate or questions on the motion before us?
Just that I think this is critical to be doing. I mean, we need to have this residential amenity. There's no point in having standards for multi-residential areas and not be using them. So yes, fully support this.
Councillor Dutta?
I was just seeking advice from the acting director with regards to this motion. Is that something we could go ahead and make, once the report has come, to go forward with it?
Through you, Chair, I wouldn't want to preempt what's in the report. That will outline the options. I suspect it's very unlikely that we would recommend amending HIPS, the Hobart Interim Planning Scheme, given how close we are to transitioning to the Tasmanian Planning Scheme. But there is also already a medium density guideline being prepared in the context of the TPS. So Mr Noy would be in a much better position to be able to update you on that.
Thank you.
I wasn't going to say anything, but look, when someone's calling for a report, this is a report, we can sit here and hypothesise and put pressure on our staff. If the report's coming back, let's argue the report when it comes.
Councillor Coates.
Look, thank you, Chair. Look, in and of itself, I very happy for the council staff to progress the report. I think very often you ask for reports, that's good practice. If it's something that needs to be done in a rush, or you can do it in this manner, which is put a motion. But I think sometimes, and I know it might seem to be an unnecessary delay, but in my mind, best practice would be that if you're going to call for officers to do a body of work, which is what this is, we're better off to go by the process where you submit a motion, it gets on the agenda for council, people can review it, discuss it. There's members of council that aren't here tonight, and we can then have that decision made at the council meeting. It probably will be the same decision, I agree. Will it add an extra week and a half, 2 weeks delay, because it'll have to be the early December meeting, but the reality is this report probably won't come back till the new year if the motion is successful. And I just think unless there's an urgent reason that it needs to be done straight away, which I don't see in this case, I just think best practice would be that you actually give council members of staff time to, consider proposed motions, have it on the agenda. Who knows? We may well put it on the council agenda. Someone come back and says, well, actually what you're asking report into is being considered as part of a new planning scheme. It's going to go live in 6 months. So you're just creating a body of work
And we'll find out.
And we may well find out. So, look, I don't disagree with the motion per se, but I think there's no reason for it to be done urgently tonight. And this is an instance where proper process should be that you get it on the agenda for the full council meeting, you allow everyone to have an opportunity to see what proposed motion is. We can debate it then.
Thank you, Councillor Coates. Just a reminder to elected members that I'd like to have people heard in silence. Councillor Lohberger.
Look, I just wanted to speak up. I do support the need for a report because I think, like a lot of us around the table, I was a little bit shocked to hear that someone could build a building with a brick wall right up to units and effectively enclose a bunch of balconies, and that's allowed. I think we do need something like this. How we arrive at it, I guess I'll leave that up to others, but I do certainly support the gist of the motion. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor. I also agree. I made the remarks in my my comments regarding the application that this is a glaring hole within our planning scheme. So I support Councillor Harvey's motion with gusto and thank him for bringing it before us. So we have the motion for a report in front of us. All those in favour of that motion, say aye. All those against? Carried unanimously. Moving on to the next item in planning, 6.1.1.
So moved.
Thank you, Deputy Lord Mayor. All those in favour? Excellent. So 6.1.1, 1 Ellerslie Road, Battery Point, partial demolition. Does anyone have any questions or comments? There being none, would somebody like to move the motion?
Move it for approval.
Officer recommendation.
Yep.
Didn't you do that? And I said aye.
Thank
I
you,
voted
Deputy
for
Lord
Helen
Mayor.
moving it.
You were too quick for me. All right. So in front of us we have a motion for approval of 6.1.1 from the Deputy Lord Mayor. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
All those against? Carried unanimously. Moving on to item 6.1.3, 7 Joynton Street 1A, Honora Avenue 5, Joynton Street, Newtown.
Recommendation by staff.
Okay, Councillor Dutta has moved a recommendation.
Question.
Deputy Lord Mayor.
Yeah, through you to the director, what is there any other alternative for parking for this application, since it has 2 street addresses?
Through you, Chair, we actually have Keith Burton here, who's the Senior Development Engineer. I might encourage him to come up to the table. And
Glad I asked the question then.
Just pull that microphone as close as you can, Mr. Burton. Deputy Lord Mayor, would you like to ask your question again?
Yeah, so given this is for 2 multiple dwellings and associated works, is there any means of accessing the block from a different way apart from the right of way?
Yes. There's both the frontage off Joynton Street that it can be accessed off, and it could also be accessed off the right of way. They have a separate frontage where they could use and provide significant area to turn and manoeuvre around there. It's just their proposal hasn't provided that.
So that was part of the sorry, I can't really see you. So thank you. So was there discussion with the applicant about having that as an alternative, since the right of way is so problematic?
So yes, the applicant was notified of the position of that it was not working the right of way, and what they proposed would also not physically work given the space that is required. But there is the secondary option that the space that, well, they have quite a large frontage, I guess you'd say, to Honora Ave, or the laneway there. So that would have enough space to push their frontage of their building back and provide the area to turn. Or similarly off Joynton, where they already have 1 car space and existing access and quite a lot of room at the front of that dwelling also.
Okay, well, thank you for trying to impress upon them that might be an alternative.
Yeah, it certainly is alternatives for this development.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Further questions?
There's alternatives with keeping this number of bedrooms and things like that, you would suspect?
Yes.
Yep, thank you.
I have a question for you, Mr. Burton. So Keith Midson prepared a traffic report that was contradictory to your interpretation of the site. Can you talk us through why you have a difference of opinion professionally with Mr. Midson in this instance?
Sure. There's also Owen here, I guess. May be a fantastic one to ask, but my personal opinion is that he's obviously used a different way of thinking. I mean, I would say that if a car can't come out of an access and it has, well, firstly, he said that was no known issues with Hunara Avenue and the access backing out. Simply not true. Council has many records of complaints around that area from people reversing out and hitting the boundary fences. So it's proofs in the pudding. I think there's photographs there included in the report so that you can look at those and see the damage to that fence. So that was probably my first real red flag, that the report didn't actually represent the on-site conditions in which they were made to look like. Yes. I can keep going, but
that's fine. Anything further from the floor? No further questions. Is there any debate from elected members? Councillor Lohberger.
I support the refusal, but you know, I just want to encourage the proponent to maybe try and deal with this on site and come back to us. It is another house. The block looks suited to having two properties on it. Just got to nut out the the parking issue, and from the sound of it, that's to do with the footprint of the house. So I'd really like to see it come back to us, but I will be voting to refuse.
Alderman Zuko.
If there's another option, instead of refusing it, why don't, is there time to, what's the time frame again? Is there time to defer it? When's
Agrees, 25th of December.
Oh, look, could we defer this and ask the officers to sit down with the proponent and see if they can find a solution and bring it back to next meeting?
Through you, Chair, we certainly could do that.
Okay, look, I'll move for deferral on that basis.
Procedural motion, so I'll put that to the floor. All those in favour, say aye. Aye. All those against? Show of hands. All those in favour of deferral? All those against? Motion for deferral is carried. So moving on to order, moving on to officer reports. Report 7.1.
Moved.
Hang on. So we need to retain a quorum.
Unfortunately, I have to go.
Can you maybe liaise with Councillor
Already
Elliott?
late.
I'll move all the items through to the questions.
All those in favour?
No.
Aye.
All those against?
And I'll move, we now go into closed. Do we have no questions?
Is there,
No. Sorry. See you later.
Well, you can't have your questions.
No questions now.
Well, that's
We could have
fair
finished
enough.
off the closed, but
Whose responsibility is it to be here?
so, just a little order. For those watching online and those in the room, Councillor Elliott and Councillor Zuko have left planning at 6:13 after item 7. This renders us unable to continue this meeting. We have a mandatory quorum of 7 required, and the room has dropped to 6. So I move that this meeting is adjourned until...
sorry, before you just do that, can I clarify that we
Councillor
finished
Harvey.
the open agenda?
Councillor Harvey, we did not finish the open agenda.
The question.
Yeah.
Questions, that's all? Because I moved all the others and then we had a quorum.
That's correct, except for questions without notice. That's correct. So I will move that we adjourn this meeting for 14 days until the subsequent planning committee.
You haven't got a quorum.
Yeah.
I think the meeting is...
It's all right.
I just have a question with regards to Councillor Will's position on this, because if has been sworn in, this is not a council meeting.
I can answer that because I was advised. So, when this term of council began, you changed the rules around committees. So there's only now one formal committee, which was a committee that had 12 people appointed to it directly. My name is not on those 12 people. And So there's no option to, like it used to be where you could co-opt anymore. And so until I'm appointed to that committee, I'm not a member, and that apparently will be an agenda item for Monday. Even though I have been sworn in front of the general manager, and so I can act as a councillor, but I'm not a member of this committee.
Yeah, and I think a comment as the acting chair only, I think that it would be helpful to council officers and our colleagues if people can let council officers, Catherine in this case, know in advance if they can't stay for the entirety of the meeting, because it might result in some phone calls being made to other elected members to ask them to come so that we ensure we have a quorum for the length of the committee. It's not, frankly, it's not good enough that we can't finish a planning meeting.
It's outrageous, really.
And with that, the